Hat tip on this next segment to our good friend Chris Lee, WRAL Sports WRAL Sports reporter. Investigative reporter would be our good friend Brian Murphy. He's also, meaning Chris Lee, is also the host of the Panthers Playbook podcast. Go check it out everywhere podcasts can be found. We were talking with him earlier today, and he was in attendance for the Dave Canales and Dan Morgan press conference today. Chris Lee was. And he said something that changed the way I look at the press conference. I watched the whole thing sitting at my desk, had it up on my computer, brought it up, and then talking with Chris Lee, he said something, and this is why we brought Chris on, because sometimes it's just different in the room. Mm-hmm. You notice different things. You get maybe a better idea on body language, and he said something, and it started clicking in my brain. Last couple commercial breaks, I've been scribbling notes. I have to apologize to Dan Morgan.
Oh.
I was not familiar with his game. Dan Morgan might be a much better communicator and dare I say diabolical communicator than I thought. Dan Morgan, and I made this observation. This is why I said things were connecting in my head. I made this observation to Dennis, to a couple people around the office right after the presser. He name-dropped former Panthers like it was his number 2 priority in this press conference. Number 1, hype up Dave Canales. Number 2, hype up former Panthers. He name-dropped Mike Rucker. He name-dropped Jonathan Stewart a whole bunch of times. He name-dropped Thomas Davis a whole bunch of times. He name-dropped Moose Muhammad a whole bunch of times. He name-dropped Jake Delhomme as an elite competitor. He name-dropped Steve Smith as a guy that played with a chip on his shoulder. He name-dropped so many former Panthers.
Kuechly, I believe, as well.
And Luke Kuechly, how can I forget? And during this press conference I'm watching, they would say a name. Oftentimes they would show him in the stands, right? They could kind of cut to him or they could show the guys. Chris Lee brings up, he goes, you know what stood out to me? There were current players there too. And he didn't mention them at all. He mentioned this entire offensive line. Chris Lee told us Zavala was there, told us Ike Ekwonu was there, told us Brady Christensen was there. None of that. I didn't know they were there.
Austin Corbett
was there. I didn't know because I wasn't in the room to see them standing off to the side, looking solemn, looking whatever they were doing. That is intentional. That is Dan Morgan being a much more savvy and ruthless communicator than I originally thought. Because do you know what's crazy? They're all on edge right now. And he's the one that helped pick them. He was in the room that picked these guys, and that press conference just said, none of y'all are safe. That press conference just said, none of your jobs are safe. Because if I say your name in this introductory press conference, we're connected, right? If I say I'm excited to see you and Dave Canales work, that means you and Dave Canales have to work or else I'm fibbing, right? I'm lying. They had no problem saying Bryce Young. They were excited to work with Bryce Young, this with Bryce Young, that with Bryce Young. They didn't name drop just about anybody else. And there were people in that room. That's choosing violence with your nonverbal communication. Like, and sometimes what you don't say is more aggressive than what you do say. If I walk up to a group full of 4 people, I shake 3 hands. That one person is going like, what the heck? What did I do to you? If he walks into a room and he makes eye contact with Thomas Davis and Moose Muhammad, and he says, what's up to Jay Stu? And he says, what's up to Rucker? And then he looks at you and keeps it moving. And he looks at Brant Tillis in the front and mentions his wife. And he looks at the family of Dave Canales and mentions them and mentions Dave and Nicole Tepper and then takes questions from the media and doesn't say anything about the current players. They're the only people in the room that weren't addressed.
Like the Key and Peele sketch. Where
yeah, they're different. And Dan Morgan had a hand in picking them. That's the ruthless part of it. He's going like, yeah, I picked you. That doesn't mean anything anymore. Right? I was the assistant GM that drafted some of you. I was in the room. That doesn't mean anything anymore. Another way that sometimes this popped into my brain during one of these commercial breaks. And by the way, I always put this disclaimer out there just to make sure nobody thinks I have any delusions. I know playing at the University of Delaware, where I played, is not in the same ballpark as playing for the Carolina Panthers. But what I can tell you is I probably cared about it just as much because that's how my brain was wired. I remember going into my junior year, there was a pump-up video that was put out, right? It was like to sell season tickets, and it was going to play on the Jumbotron before we ran out of the tunnel. And I was competing to be the starting quarterback this year. Ended up starting, but I was competing at this point. I wasn't in the video. Wasn't asked, right? And the worst part is because I was doing like media internships and stuff, I knew the marketing team, right? Because like I interned with them in the summer. So I went to them and I was like, hey, man, why am I not in the video? And they said, oh, we wanted you. Coach turned it down. And I went, ooh. Okay. Coach deliberately didn't include me with the people he thought were going to be the contributors next year. All right, where's the weight room? Right? Like, all right, let me get it. Let me get a wide receiver on the line. We're about to go throw. Let me go watch some film. Like, that's how it was. If every single person that was in that room for the Carolina Panthers, as that was a current player, that watched Dan Morgan not say anything about them and watched Dave Canales not talk about how excited he was to coach them, all right, where's the weight room? All right, my offensive lineman, where's somebody I can hand fight with? Where's somebody I can do bag drills with? Where's somebody I can get in the film room with? Dan Morgan, here's the other part that stood out to me once you get down this rabbit hole, right? And all of a sudden things start making sense, right? It's like the end of an Ocean's 11 movie when you see the whole heist come together, and then you're like, oh, yeah. He did say at the beginning of the movie, I should have known he was going to steal the jewels from the yacht. And that's not the actual plot of Ocean's 11, but you know what I'm saying. The logo needs to be feared again because right now it's not. Paraphrasing, but that's from Dan Morgan. The logo needs to be feared again. Just that alone implies it wasn't feared. That's looking at the team right now and saying, ain't getting it done. Which, by the way, I have no problem with him saying this. I like that he's saying this because the 2023 Panthers shouldn't have been feared. You won 2 games. They were both on last-second field goals. You had a lead for 0 plays in the fourth quarter of games this year. Dan Morgan was given this job in part because of who Dan Morgan the player was, right? The passion, the will, the fight, the 25 tackles in the Super Bowl. If he came up there like a Care Bear, right? If he came up there like this was an episode of Barney, I love you, you love me, like we're a big... No, it's like if you want to be in this family, you're going to have to get with it. You want to be in this family, we're a violent and feared family, right? Keep pounding. That doesn't come from giving hugs. That is a real message Dan Morgan sent today. And I almost missed it. Matter of fact, everybody that wasn't in the room might have missed it.
Yeah.
But we talked to Chris Lee. I said, what surprised you? He didn't hesitate. He said, well, they name-dropped a lot of the former players. They didn't mention the other guys that were there.
Yeah, I had no idea any of them were actually there.
That's my point.
Yeah.
That's a message sent not to us. That's a message sent to them, and I guarantee you they heard it loud and clear. Because do you know why you attend that if you're a former player? You want to get on their good side, right? Or if you're a current player, excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
You want to get on their good side, right? I was supporting you during your press conference, and they said, worry about yourself before you worry about supporting me. You want to support me, earn your spot back in the starting lineup. You want to support me, get with it or get lost. I apologize, Dan Morgan. This is the first pivot, right? And I always say be willing to change your stance, right? Mm-hmm. If you learn more information, be willing to change your mind. That's what smart people do. This is the first time you changed my mind on something. This was a good move by Dan Morgan, the savvy communicator that you need to be to coach through the media, to GM through the media, use a press conference to set a tone of nobody's job is safe. And after that season last year, nobody's job should be safe.